Hi, welcome to my session at MS Stage today. For the next couple of minutes or next 45 minutes, I'll be your host, and I'm gonna do some talking about governance stuff, taking control of your Azure environment. Um, I'm a cloud solution architect, working a lot in Azure. I work for a small consulting company based in the Netherlands, where I do a lot of Azure stuff, mostly migrating or expanding existing solutions to the cloud or creating new stuff over there, which is cool stuff. And I'm gonna, show you how you can make your Azure environment even better and even more secure today. So let's move on to the slides. Um, so this session is titled Take Control of Your Azure Environment. Uh, and I am going to talk a bit about, well, what to do to make your environment more secure, more easy to manage, so you will have better control of your production environment or maybe even your uh, dev test acceptance environments. If you have any questions, feel free to ask them in the chat or reach out to me later on. The links are here on my social media for Twitter or Twitch or whatever. You can find me. Also, some links are specified. And my last slide. So, what's important for an Azure environment for your solution? Well, delivering stable solutions, continuous improvement of your solution, being compliant in some way, being secure, and obviously cost of your cloud environment. So I've striped through the deliver stable solutions and continuous improvement because that's stuff for a completely different session. So what's important today is being compliant, secure, and cost. Because at the end of the month, you have to pay a bill to Microsoft for your Azure usage, and you want it to be as low as possible. But how to, well, keep stuff in check? One way to do this is, set budgets. But in order to set budgets, you have to know, well, what your forecast of your costs will be and how will you manage this stuff. Well, you can get a forecast for a solution, for your department, for your overall Azure environment, for whatever you want. You can even check a specific resource in Azure Cost Management and see what it will cost this month, maybe last month, maybe a forecast for next month. Useful stuff. Most of the time, I want to see a high over picture of my solution this month will cost about 2,000 euros, or maybe less, maybe more. At least I want to know about my solution because I'm a developer architect, so that's stuff I need to keep in check. Maybe your manager or finance controller wants to know what the department Azure cost will be. So if your IT organization spends about 10K per month, your finance controller might want to know this. Or maybe your CEOs or the C-level people want to know what the overall Azure environment costs. And you can check all of this in Azure, and I'm going to show you how to do this in a bit. But also one other thing which is important is permissions. Permissions and setting those permissions and granting roles to specific people. So how to do this? Well, you can also do this at different levels in your environment. You can do this per resource, per department, for everything, whatever you want. Some people might need more for a specific resource or resource group or solution, others less. And well, it's kind of You could say operations team get admin rights to everything, but most of the time, not every operations person needs access to everything all the time. So you might want to figure out something for this. So how to go about this? Well, as I mentioned, you can set levels and budgets, but also role-based authentication at different levels, like resource groups or subscriptions. One thing I find easy to do and well, good to manage is creating lots and lots of subscriptions for every solution you have. So solutions or subscriptions for all the things. If you create a specific solution for something, create a new subscription for it. If you have to create a new solution next week or in 2 months or maybe in a year, create a new subscription for it. And you can even create multiple subscriptions for this solution, like a dev, test, acceptance, production, which is, well, kind of the traditional way of working nowadays. But just create new subscriptions. This makes it easy to manage and configure a lot of stuff, because a subscription is rather isolated. So it's easier to manage, and you don't have any sudden cross dependencies between your services. So a good way to, well, restrict access to stuff and keep stuff in check. But once you have like more S4 subscriptions, it can become quite a hassle to, well, set budgets, do some role-based authentication, keep them compliant, keep them secure. So how to go about this? Well, there's this new thing called management groups, which is a layer. You could see this as a layer on top of subscriptions. Management groups, as the name suggests, is a group which you can manage and you can put subscriptions inside it. So as the documentation states, it's an enterprise-grade management layer for subscriptions. So this means you can, like I said, manage the stuff underneath this. So how does it look in practice? Well, something like this. I'll let it sink in for a couple of seconds. As you can see over here, there's the root management group, which everyone has. By default, every subscription will be placed underneath the root management group. But you can also create new management groups inside this. So for human resources, for IT, marketing, any other, depending on how you want to organize it, you can do anything with this. And create even more nested management groups underneath and place subscriptions next to it. You can even place subscriptions and management groups next to each other, which might be useful in some scenarios. I'm at the moment at a project where we're doing something similar to this. And as you might see, you can also join or have multiple types of subscriptions for your management groups. So, good stuff. One of the best ways, or well, one thing which I find very useful of this is you can have, well, budgets in place for a specific management group. So I have 4 management groups, or I've created 4 management groups at the root node, at the root group for my personal tenant. And in the company group, I have created a nested group for demoing and added 4 subscriptions for demoing inside it. So this is one way to organize the management groups and your subscriptions. Here I am inside the Azure Portal, inside the management group page, and as you can see, I have my 4 management groups in place. One thing you might notice though is my details link over here is clickable, and if you navigate to this page, you will probably see it's not clickable. That's because the tenant root group, by default, you can't change it. You can't change the tenant root group by default. You need you need special permissions to do some changes on this. That's because this one is, well, rather special, because it's where everything lives underneath. So if you assign policies over here in the tenant root group, it will be applied to every subscription, every management group underneath. Also, access control, same applies. This one is still useful for cost analysis and budgets, but in order to get here, in order to get to the tenant root group, you need to do something special. Inside the Azure directory, obviously you need to log in first. As a global admin, you need to be a global administrator in order to get to the tenant root group. And if you can get to it, you need the user access management permissions, which isn't a normal role you can assign to yourself. You have to specify it inside the AAD and specify it in the properties blade and say, yes, I want to have user access management to, well, this tenant. Once you do so, you have to log out and log in back again. You can do something over here. You can, well, make the changes to your tenant root group the way you want it. So that's good to know. It's also mentioned in documentation a couple of times, but I can't I can't state it enough. This one is important. Once you've done your changes inside the tenant root group, please remove the permissions from your account again. It's too much permissions, and well, as always, we probably want to work with the least privilege principle. So strip away the permissions of your global admin account, and, well, be sure to leave this one alone as much as you can. So on to the next slide. This management group has 2 subscriptions inside it, and apparently it'll cost me like $45 at the end of the month for both subscriptions. Of course, you can also do this without management groups by selecting the cost of a subscription 1 and subscription 2, add them together and be done with it. But this is just an easy way to, well, get the management and get and set budgets. At least I find this very useful. But as I mentioned, well, cost is important and gives you some forecasts. Something I find more useful and more something I'm using is role-based authentication. So as you can see, I'm still in the MVP management group, and I've created an application which has owner permissions, the owner role. So this is a bad practice. Don't do this at home. But it has owner permissions on, well, this management group, which means everything which, well, is placed underneath this management group, like my 2 MVP subscriptions, this application will have owner permissions too, which is very, very useful. Or at least to me, this is very useful. Because this is my Azure DevOps, and I want my Azure DevOps to, well, do stuff in the subscriptions. Still, it shouldn't have been an owner. It should probably have been a contributor or maybe a reader, something other than owner. But it can become quite a hassle to do this manually for each management group, especially if you have a lot and you have rather the same permissions across multiple management groups. Or maybe you want to do even more and making your management groups and subscriptions more compliant to what you have. So what to do then? Well, there's an easy way to make your environment more compliant and more easy to manage. And that's which you can use policies for. So, policies. What are policies? Well, in short, you can define what can and can't be done in an environment in your resource. So a resource might be a subscription, it might be a resource group, it might be something. But with Azure policies, you can enforce the organizational standards and get a compliant solution, compliant environment, just like the doc state. So you don't have to read this through right now. You can just check the link, the overview of Azure policies. So what does a policy look like? Well, it's just another resource inside Azure. When you create a new policy definition, you have to specify where to store it. So the definition location, I've chosen the tenant root group, which is the topmost management group you can have. So if I specify it over here, if I store it over here, I can use it everywhere underneath. In this specific policy, I want to set the allowed locations of where to place resources. So I'm based in the Netherlands. Most of the time, or near 100% of the time, I want to deploy resources to Western Europe. The only reason I might want to deploy something to the US is because I'm using something in preview and it's only, been deployed to some US data center, US region. But I'm creating a policy over here, allowed location, and I only want to specify, 1 or 2 regions. So this description is a bit stale because I only want to allow Western Europe. But this is the creating a new category governance demo, and this is the JSON you need to, put inside. As you can see, a policy rule if not field location in allowed locations. So this is the parameter. It looks a bit like an ARM template, right? Well, not really, it's JSON. But it also has parameters just like an ARM template. And in the parameters I have the allowed templates, which is an array, so I can specify multiple values. And I have the strong type location. There are multiple strong types, obviously the string and stuff like this, but also location, which gives me a nice drop down when assigning this policy. So I can select which locations are allowed with this policy definition. So when creating a policy definition, it isn't automatically assigned. So that's good to know. This is just a resource you put, you place somewhere, and it, can be used. It doesn't have to be used. So policy definitions. Once it has been created, you have this definition inside your management group, and from here on you can assign it, assign the policy, and you can specify what the scope has to be. So over here, as you remember, I stored it in a tenant root group, and I am now assigning it to the company group. So everything underneath the company group, which if you remember correctly has my governance demo management group and 4 subscriptions underneath. So I'm assigning this policy with some name enabled, and at the next page I can specify what the allowed locations are. So as I mentioned, I only want to deploy stuff to Western Europe. So that's the value I'm selecting over here, and doing some next finish, and it has been assigned to my scope. So now I can only deploy stuff to Western Europe in every subscription, every management group underneath the company group. Clear? This is very cool stuff. So obviously this one is useful to me, But you can also use policies for other stuff, like which service tiers to use. Maybe you want to enforce your developers can only create virtual machines of the D series and only with less than 8 cores. Well, reasons. But maybe you also want to enforce your devs or your people who are logged in can create expensive clusters. Like if you spin up an expensive AKS cluster, your financial department will probably be a bit mad at you because even running it for one day can be quite expensive. I've once spun up a log analytics cluster or a data explorer cluster, which cost about 15K per month. So someone told me I might want to, well, choose a smaller cluster or turn it off quite fast. So you can specify which service tiers to use. Also useful, well, it's useful for a lot of reasons. Deny stuff, deny changes to specific resources, deny deletes of resources, which is useful for your production environment. You don't want someone to accidentally delete databases, storage accounts, stuff like this, because most of the time it holds customer data, and if your backup and restore policy isn't on par, you might have a problem over here. Security checks also useful, so is HTTPS enabled on your app services? Are you doing encryption at the end-to-end encryption of data and transmit? Useful stuff, Azure policies. But, well, as I mentioned, policies useful. You should be using them. I'm using them. I'm not using them enough, but it's very useful. But when having a lot of policies, and I don't need one or two, when having a lot, you probably want to automate or making them deployed automatically for your environment. So I've switched to the Azure Portal because you might be thinking, well, those Azure policies sound great, but it's a lot of work. You need to specify a lot. It was some magic JSON, not very user-friendly. Well, it actually is, and I'm going to show you because there are loads of useful Azure policies out of the box, which you get for free. So over here, this is the policy page, and you can see I have a lot of policies in place, ASC, some system center stuff, security center stuff. Okay, cool. I'm not compliant. My subscriptions aren't compliant well, I haven't done anything for security center, so this makes a lot of sense. I have my allowed locations policy set up in my company management group, so it's compliant. It has been assigned. So no compliant resources because I haven't got any resources inside it, as you can see. So this is kind of a useful screen. At least to me, you can see which services are and aren't compliant. So back to the policy. But most of them I haven't set up myself, or at least I haven't set any of them up myself, only the allowed locations. And that one is kind of redundant also, because there are loads and loads of built-in policies. As you can see in the policy page under definitions, you can see, well, I don't even know how many there are. So this is mine, allowed locations. But if you search for it, allowed locations, this one was already built in also. And if I'm clicking on it, you can see, well, the implementation is, well, pretty much the same as what I had specified myself. But this is a great inspiration for your own policies, or at least in my opinion, these built-in policies will serve as a great inspiration and samples for your own. So if you're not happy with the default, the built-in allowed locations template policy, you can make your adjustments by yourself and, well, create a new policy. So what's also great is the security. So category, I can just select app service and, oh, sorry, it went a bit too fast. And, well, ensure a specific Python version is installed. Ensure HTTPS function apps and app services are only accessible via HTTPS. Stuff like this. So this is stuff you want to have and stuff you can enforce by using policies on your subscriptions. And, well, if you're like me, you will assign them to the management groups, so you don't have to specify them on your subscriptions manually. Very, very cool stuff in my opinion. Now, of course, you can create your own, like I just shown you, but please check out these policies first before you create your own, because there's a pretty good chance there's already one in place for what you're trying to do. Like for storage account, you can, well, check which one you want and apply them to your management group. So back to the slide deck. So what to do now? Well, we're going to take it a step further and introduce Azure Blueprints. So what are Azure Blueprints? As the documentation states, you can rapidly build new environments which are compliant for your organization. I'm going to give you a couple of seconds to read the overview, but it's to speed up the creation of your resources. And you can assign blueprints to subscriptions and resource groups, which is useful, especially if you have decided to spin up multiple subscriptions for your organization for each and every solution. And when I say solution, I don't mean the solution you have in Visual Studio. I mean a complete solution, which can consist of multiple Visual Studio solutions, can consist of multiple solutions in different languages, whatever. At least one isolated solution which solves a business problem, which might be 20 services inside your Azure subscription. It's just the business solution, you might say, not a technical solution. So, blueprints. Creating a blueprint is rather easy. You can, choose blueprints in your Azure environment, create a blueprint, give it a name, and specify where to store it. So this is important, as the wizard states, management group blueprints assigned or deployed to a management group or subscription, you can only use the blueprint for resources which are underneath the location it's stored at. So I'm using the company group right here, which means I can use it in my demo company, my demo governance group, and the subscriptions underneath. I can use it in my MVP management group or my trials or work management group, because I haven't assigned it at that level. So you can only go down, not left and right. So when you're creating a blueprint, you have to specify artifacts. So you don't have to do this right away. You can just create the blueprints, as many as you want, and add artifacts later on. So over here, I can add an artifact to a subscription, which is what I want to do most of the time. I'm trying to manage most of my policies and stuff and artifacts on a subscription level and not per se on a resource group level, because I think that's too fine-grained. For me, at least. Your mileage may differ. So adding an artifact over here, I want to have a role assignment of, well, a specific security group, and they should be a reader for the subscriptions. I have some friends which I do some projects with, and I want them to see the resources inside my Azure subscription. So I'm specifying a reader over here. In a real life scenario, you might have a custom role like a development team or people in the IT department, which should be able to read and create support tickets for every subscription. So I'm at the moment I'm busy for a customer setting all of this stuff up. And what we want is to have every developer and operations person to have read permission on the resources, so not the data, just the resources, and being able to, well, create support tickets. Because when something is stuck or yeah, something is gone awry in production, we want to create support tickets for Microsoft in order for them to solve it with us. But we don't want to have the developers to have read access to, well, the data of the customers, because that's kind of a leak of personal information. So we've created a customer role where the developers and the developers only have read permissions on the resources and can create support tickets. So that's an artifact, that's a role assignment you might want to set to a management group, or you might want to set in a blueprint and assign this blueprint to a management group in order to, well, automatically have this role assignment on all subscriptions underneath. Of course, you can expand the role assignment of the developers in, well, the dev and test environment. Maybe you want to have them contributor or owner access in the dev subscription, only have contributor in the test, and in acceptance maybe a reader. Maybe you should be able to read data also over there, whatever you want. So you can specify it in additional artifacts, additional policies. So adding the reader, so as I mentioned, the developers should be read. You can also specify the user, app, or group when assigning the artifact, which is useful in some scenarios or in a lot of scenarios. Because as I mentioned, you might want to have different permissions depending on the subscription, depending on the resource group. So if that's the case, you can specify it when on assigning. If not, if it's a constant value, you can specify it over here. Next up, adding the artifacts. So I just did a role assignment, but as you remember, I also created a policy of my own, the allowed location. So only allow resource to be deployed in a specific location. And by adding an artifact, you can also say, I want to add a policy to, well, this blueprint. So over here I have my custom policy, which is the allowed location, and I can assign it. Also, I can append tags to the resources, stuff like this. You can also use blueprints to create resources inside a subscription. So if you want to have specific resources always available inside your subscription, you can add them over here and even assign new artifacts to those resources. So for the customer I'm working with now, we always have one specific storage account in the subscriptions of our solution. We use this storage account to deploy ARM templates, to deploy shared, shared stuff, which are necessary for deployment. So think of ARM templates, scripts, stuff like this, assets. In order to automate this and make sure everything is being deployed in a consistent manner, we can add this artifact over here, and now we know for sure this storage account is being deployed. Here's some stuff. So now, when we're happy with it, we can assign the blueprint. Assigning the blueprint is just a next finish. Next finish. You select the subscription you want to apply it to. You give it a name. The version. Versions are important. You have to specify when, publishing a blueprint, you have to specify the version number. So this is important. And also, you can specify the lock assignment. So should people be able to change or differ the stuff you have set or not. I have chosen the don't lock over here because I want to have free access on what I'm doing, but you can be more restrictive over here. Managed identity, managed identity will be created in order to deploy the artifacts. So if you create new artifacts in your subscription, this will be done using managed identity for this blueprint. So it can take a while for the blueprint to have been deployed. It's depending on the artifacts you have, obviously. But as you can see, I'm waiting over here, and after a couple of minutes, in my case, all of the stuff has been deployed. If some problem has occurred, you can see it over here also. I once had the issue of deploying a storage account which already existed somewhere in the world, so I had to change it over here and assign a blueprint again. No biggie. It's just, it's easy to check over here if everything has went well, everything has been deployed well or not. So to recap, what I'd advise you to do, or to at least to consider, is to start using management groups. Once you have the management groups in place, you can also start using policies. You can, change the order of those two, because policies are awesome. You should use them right away in order to enforce some stuff and avoid making a lot of cost for services you won't be using or shouldn't be using for reasons. Especially considering customer data. Here in Europe, we have this thing that we want to store customer data in the country we're living it, or in the country where the customer, the users are living at. So this is a great way to prevent data will live somewhere in the US or Asia or somewhere else. I think the same rules apply in the US, so you probably, for US citizens, you probably also have to store data in the US. So that's a great way to set policies. Now you can use it for just about everything to enforce security and compliance in your solution. In order to make it easier, create management groups. I started with management groups because I have created some workers which had to work and retrieve data from multiple subscriptions. And in order to do so, I could have used multiple identities in order to get data, but now I've created management group granted this one identity, one managed identity, access to those subscriptions or to the management group, which, well, because of inheritance, because of how the inheritance works, it also got the reader permissions on all subscriptions underneath. Very useful. I'm now busy implementing the policies, which are also useful for this customer because we want data to be stored in Western Europe and also want to use some, make sure we're not spending a lot of money of expensive services, but you can use it for just about everything. I even saw a colleague of mine disabling checks in Azure Security Center because they were just plain wrong, or they didn't want to see those security checks in System Center, so they disabled them via policies. Useful if you know what you're doing. So once you have 1 and 2 in place for, well, small scale, you can start doing this on, well, big enterprise scale and using blueprints. You don't have to be an enterprise, of course, in order to use blueprints, but it's maybe too much of a hassle to use them if you're, well, just a small company with 1 or 2 solutions inside a single subscription. Blueprints might be a bit overkill. So 1 or 2, use them. Blueprints, if you want to grow bigger, if you want to grow, well, bigger scale, deploy more stuff in Azure, use them also. So that's it for me for now. If you have any questions, if you have any more questions, feel free to ask them in the chat, ask them on any of my services. You can contact me on GitHub, Twitter, email, Twitch. I try to live code once a week, so feel free to hook me up over there or read more on this matter on my blog. I haven't shown you how to automate this today for, well, time reasons. I only have a couple of minutes left and I can't show you all the scripts. But it goes without saying, you can deploy management groups, policies, and blueprints via PowerShell, via ARM templates, via the CLI. So all of the, well, the normal ways of deploying stuff in Azure. You can deploy these resources also. So that's something to consider. So what I've shown you now is just the UI to keep it simple and to let you understand the concepts. If you want to know more about this in detail in a more advanced session or talk with me one-on-one, feel free to hook up and I can show you some of the scripts I've created or help you out if you get stuck. So thank you for attending this session. I'll give you a couple of minutes of your time back and hopefully you'll enjoy the rest of MS stage today. Thank you all.